This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today I've got a good friend coming on with me to talk about ways to review for the rhetorical analysis part of the exam without having to actually subject your students to death by essay writing. So you're going to want to stick around and check out what we do. Awesome. Welcome back. I am here with my friend Shannon, and she's going to tell us about a great review assignment that she does with her students before the AP exam, and actually what she does with her students throughout the year. But before that happens, I want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters, which are like right over here. We at the Garden of English really support what you've been providing for us as we work to provide material for you. Anybody who's interested about understanding or knowing the benefits of what you can get from supporting the Garden of English on Patreon can actually check out this video right up here. And now that I've covered that, I want to get to you, Shannon. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll actually talk about the assignment that we've got up here, which will also be linked down in the description, by the way. Shannon has provided us with that as well. So take it away.
Oh, hi, I'm Shannon Hampton. I've been teaching AP for about 15 years. I teach in Aberdeen, Maryland. And so totally I've been teaching for about 22 years. So this has been actually really great for me because I'm probably an old teacher who's kind of gotten stuck in a rut. And I've always done AP this way. Then they added the synthesis essay and I cried a lot. And now things are changing and it's been difficult, pandemic and all those. So with Tim's help, we've been going through and sort of changing my real basic kind of stuff to something that it's a little bit more scaffolded for situations. And that's, really trying to support our kids in kind of like if we're online, if we're virtual, if we're hybrid or wherever we are, to get them prepared for the test.
Right. And you know what's interesting? I didn't realize that you were pre-synthesis as well. So that was our first major change, and now we've got our writing questions, right? So I wasn't pre-synthesis, but I am writing questions. That seems to be the major changes that I've had to go through so far. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually go through a document. Like I said, it's linked down below in the description. And the document that we're looking at here is actually based off of Patrick Henry's speech at the Virginia Convention. So if you've never read that, then by all means, I would suggest that you just click at the link that's at the top of the document, or I'll actually link the speech down in the description below as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through here, and Shannon, why don't you actually walk me through this assignment, like what is the assignment as a whole, and then we'll look at specific questions, and we'll talk about why we do things the way you do and in the order, and why this is, essentially good for review. Instead of doing death by essay, because I think that a lot of teachers do that kind of like, oh, we need to review for our AP exam, so let's do death by essay. But this might be potentially even a more effective review of rhetorical construction and understanding that can easily be turned into an essay. But yeah, tell us about it.
So this is typically, the original form of this is typically something I do fairly early in the year. And there's a lot more leading language and stuff like that, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But I really want kids, again, I don't start with Patrick Henry. He's not my first out of the gun. He's a little, a little difficult. So yeah. We've done some other stuff. We start with Red Jacket, some things that are more approachable for kids. I do a lot of historical pieces that sort of run with AP US as well. So they get a lot of...
That's a great idea, by the way. Correlating that, I'm thinking about doing that in my upcoming years because I'm like, oh my word, if we correlate, then all the kids will know the context consistently. That might make my life a little easier. But anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No. That's really a great thing that my kids will tell me that. They'll say, oh, we're doing this in AP US, or oh, hey, did you know about this? And a lot of my kids really love history and they know way more about history than I do. Like my history's pretty okay, yeah. But they go through and they're just like, oh, and this, I'm like, oh, great. So they can bring in a lot more of that connection as well. Some of the details of, the specific context and the exigence is a little beyond them, but great. That's what we have a job, right?
Right. I say that's our job to teach them how to find that in the reading itself. So let's do it, Absolutely. So let's actually look at this document here. And I'm under the impression, right, that we can make this document for any reading that the kids are doing at the beginning of the year. But we're talking about it right now for review purposes. And the purpose of the document is initially, right, for us to give it to the students. And this gives them the concrete and abstract things that they need to look for without actually telling them what they are. And they have to kind of establish those correlations, which is nice because if we're reviewing for rhetorical analysis, if we haven't done it, if we've been doing argument for a while or synthesis, it's good to kind of give the kids a scaffold and then move on to a second part of an assignment, which we'll get to. But, I'm noticing your first question here. When you create any of these documents for any speech, is this always your first question?
Normally, yes, I put purpose first. There are the occasional ones where just because of the layout, it ends up being further down. But I always point it out to the kids. I'm like, start here, friends,
Yeah.
regardless of where it is on the worksheet.
Right, and I think purpose is a really great place to start, because if students don't understand the purpose of the speech after they read it, then how can they actually get to analyzing the rhetoric, or how the author built the argument to convey the purpose, right? So that's kind of how I work with my students as well too. So if my students are going to be doing something, I'm like, find the purpose first, then find the text that got you to understand that purpose, and then say what the author is doing in that text, and then boom, you can do your rhetorical analysis of whatever you're looking at.
Right.
Yeah, so I think this is a great way to start every single question here. So when I saw it on the document, I was like, oh, what an awesome review, because the kids realize that everything has to be centered around purpose. And if it's not centered around purpose, then we're really going to have a hard time analyzing the rhetoric. Like, I might see, even, parallel structure, but if I can't tie it to purpose, then at that point, then we're toast.
Right.
So that seems to be the case. Now, I was
I
really.
did. Oh,
Yep,
sorry to
go ahead.
interrupt. One
No,
thing
no
that I did
worries.
want to say is it's really easy for us to tell, additionally, if we're doing this as a review, if kids have the first question wrong, they have the purpose incorrect, we know that there's a misreading or something like that. So we'd have to back up and punt, like maybe even as a group, before you totally let them loose on this. Let's make sure that we have the purpose. And that's often what I will do. Let's make sure we have this purpose correct before I let you, run off into the woods and come back
Right.
with something scary.
Right. No, no, and that's absolutely true as well. And even, in thinking about review, we can get kids, to work in groups and stuff like that too. And so then if one kid has part of the purpose and the other kid has another part of the purpose, they come together and they're like, oh, this is the whole purpose. Oh, we can write it out together. No, absolutely, excellent idea. So next, right, what I also appreciated is that the next thing that you do is you say, okay, Henry addresses a speech to Peyton Randolph, the powerful man from a Virginia family, convention's president, the whole works, right? And you really focus on this idea of the direct address and his use of the word gentleman being powerful. And then it says, how does it establish a speaker's tone? Now, one of the things that I noticed about this particular question is how it goes right into the beginning of the speech. When you lay out your questions in a review assignment like this, or even at the beginning of the year, if you give this assignment at the beginning of the year, like, do you focus on chronology, or what do you try to go for with that?
So it really depends on the level. I always lay my worksheets out this way, that I try to go in chronological order. I try not to jump around too much, especially in the beginning, because kids are just like, I can't find things, and it just makes it too hectic. There's too many balls in the air for them in many cases. And so I like to go through in chronological order, because it also helps. Not only can they find things, but it'll help see like how the piece moves. And if
Yeah.
they're working toward that more organic structure in their own writing, they're like, oh, and then this happens, and this happens, and this happens, rather than it just being kind of chaotic.
Right, and actually, so essentially, what it also kind of sounds like, if all of our questions like this are going chronologically, they should be able to take what's going on in these stems here and their answers, and actually create an entire rhetorical analysis essay based on what's going on. Now, one other thing that I'd like to just point out here, I really appreciate something about this particular assignment on the page here, is that I feel like in like older textbooks, they would say, explain why direct address is used, or explain, his use of the word gentleman. But we now have this kind of little line here that says that, in relation to establishing the speaker's tone. Now, it doesn't give away the tone, but it does seem to push the kids to understanding that the direct address and the use of the word gentleman works towards that tone element. And now we're directing the kids. And I think this is what you mentioned earlier when you were talking about scaffolding with kids that have gone through a pandemic and may have, not got, or should I say, not received everything that they would have normally done in a normal school year. This helps scaffold, but it still forces them to draw the connection. We didn't tell them what the tone was, but we did tell them, look at this language, and then know that it connects to the speaker's tone, but you have to kind of tell us how. And so we can build those skills. And, this is 4 more weeks to review. So let's continue to build those skills. Awesome. Now, interestingly enough, right, as we go to question 3, now we're not going to go through this whole document, of course, because we're going to talk about what this can lead into. But there were some questions in here that I was just like, oh, man, I'm going to talk about these, right? This third one is nice and interesting because, in a past video of mine, which you can find right up here, I talked about the death of ethos, pathos, and logos. And this question here definitely deals with that. And I want to just know a little bit about what you would do in regarding those terms, because we had a conversation about this earlier in with this question. So our question here is, in argument, words such as but signal transitions, contrasts, and oppositions. So it's nice because you're showcasing to the kids, look for those transitions and whatnot, and you're telling them what word to look for. And so these stems are scaffolded, which is just great. I think you're giving the kids so much, but not too much, right? But then it says, consider what Henry is doing with his rather long sentence, beginning with these words and ending with these words, and explain. It then says, explain how this sentence develops Henry's character in relation to those around him, potentially affects his audience emotionally, and begins to establish his line of reasoning. Can you work me through that part and what that would look like at the beginning of the year and whatnot, and why it's worded this way now?
Sure, because at the beginning of the year, I would use our good friends Logos, Ethos, and Pathos because not only I know that my kids are coming from the 10th grade honors, and the last unit in 10th grade honors is typically rhetoric, and they focus on that sort of introduction to logos, ethos, and pathos happen there.
Yeah.
So it helps to sort of step my kids. They're like, oh, like Henry's character. Okay, yeah, I got that. Or emotion, yes. And we just have to make sure we're connecting like pathos and not ethos, because sometimes the P and the E like throw them off.
Absolutely. Yes.
So,
and that's one of the reasons why I don't even use it, so the kids don't even get confused. And I always tell my students, you don't need to use Greek on an English test,
So that, and for the beginning of the year, instead of using this language that's highlighted, which would be more of an end of the year or, middle of the year kind of transitional, I would put in parentheses, like keep the Henry's character, and then in parentheses, put the terminology that they're comfortable with or that they at least are familiar with. So it's a nice anchor for them.
Right. And, it's one of those things too, where, I think that if we just leave the Greek there, that the kids will kind of still hold on to that. Like, I don't know about you, but like, one of the reasons why I changed from not even using those terms at all was because my students would hang on to those even after the first few months. If I were like, don't use this terminology anymore, sure enough, May would come around and they would be like, there'd be like a death clinch on those things, and I'd be like, guys, gals, you gotta stop.
Let it go.
And so, but you know what? I think though, like even if we put Henry's character, if we put ethical appeal there, or if we put emotionally, put the word pathos in parentheses, it at least gives the students the comforts about what they're looking for.
Yes.
But now it seems to showcase like, how does this develop Henry's character? So we're not going to say it develops his ethos. It's going to say, okay, it develops this about who he is as a person, just because of how this is worded. And so because of that, I think this is like the fourth video in a row where my phone has actually gone off. But anyway, but because of that, I think that's a great scaffolding movement here. And I was like looking at this question and I was like, oh yeah, this is driving kids away from the simplistic understanding of those terms and definitely getting them to provide the analysis there. So you've got a bunch of other awesome questions in here, but like I said, we're not going to talk about all of them. But I was really intrigued about the illusion question here. Just talk me through this here, like why you think this was brought up. Why you focused on the illusions yourself. And we'll talk a little bit how this is seen on the exam as well.
So I know that illusions are really hard for our kids. They seem to be getting more and more challenging, especially if they're older. Like pop culture stuff, they tend to do pretty well on, but anything that's getting to be quite a bit dated, they struggle with. And so some of that is just about building background knowledge, just to give them a little bit more to carry with them.
Right.
And I do know that in my school, we do teach the Odyssey. So I know that they get the Odyssey. So that's, again, something that they can kind of, oh yeah, like stuff that I have learned in English, I can actually use again. Sometimes they think like, I'm never using this again.
I know, seriously, like this stuff doesn't transfer. Of course it does. That's the point, right?
So that's what I was kind of going with. I knew that they would have the Odyssey, and if they had to kind of dig back down there and find it. And then the biblical question, again, my kids really struggle with the biblical questions, and that's really dependent on, what kind of school you teach at, what kind of, clientele we have.
Yep.
And so usually we end up having to talk about it. And we kind of joke, there's like always a couple of kids who are like, is that Jesus? I'm like, sure is.
Yeah, right. Right.
So,
absolutely. And, one of the things about this question here too, though, right, is that when we think about creating scaffolded questions, like basically what we're trying to present here is not just give your kids review sheets where you go through the speech and you just say, why does the author use an allusion here? Why does the author whatever? Like, these questions are purposely directed at getting kids to understand the rhetorical choices that are being made through these types of rhetorical devices that they can locate. And so, like question number 5 here, it talks about, the connections that illusions make project common understandings about elements of the earlier work
Right.
onto meanings of the latter work. And on the exam, they do have footnotes that typically explain an illusion. But that little explanation typically also gives enough where it can say, okay, good. What in that explanation is projected onto this meaning? And then having the kids go through and just describing that, like the work itself, and then explaining the correlation. We're now getting kids to just move past this idea of using an illusion. And now the word illusion can be turned into a verb. So, a lot of teachers, yeah, right. A lot of teachers that, are used to using devices instead of choices. Well, fine. If your kids know what metaphors are, help them turn those into verbs. Compare, contrast, juxtapose, right? For illusion, well, so and so alludes to. And so I'm looking at these things and I'm just like, wow, what a great assignment. And now, obviously, this does require, if this is our review assignment for whatever speech you choose, it does require a little work up front for the teacher. But we'll talk about how this turns into better review for students in just a minute here. So we've got some more questions here. We see a similar thing with question 7, where we talk about how the parallel structure that's seen actually emphasizes, and the idea that repetition is always meant to emphasize. And I'm like, oh, good. So now kids need to just answer what is being emphasized. So these questions I just think are perfectly scaffolded the whole way through. But I want to just shift down now to this last part here, which is basically a shift of, okay, so we get the kids to kind of review this with some questions, and they don't have to write full essays here. There are 9 questions. You could do this over a couple of days, could even be homework for a couple of nights and whatnot. But this last part here, I want to know, what was your thought about producing this kind of last moment here, originally and even now? And then what does this lead into as a further assignment to review?
So originally, like again, at the beginning of the year, this would be much more, I would tell them like illusion, analyze, find something that some kind of illusion we haven't talked about and like tell me why it's important. I try to make sure the kids like tie it back to purpose, look at, because we do a lot of like, how does this tie back to purpose? How does it tie back to purpose?
Right.
And so that's what I like, how does it relate to an audience? How does it, to the biblical, like they do tend to get like folks back then were relatively religious. Either you were or you pretended that you were. Like,
Right. Seriously.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, and the kids are pretty savvy about that too. Like they know that, some of the founding fathers weren't necessarily as religious as they may have publicly put on to be.
Right. I remember reading Hamilton, and Hamilton couldn't stand Jefferson, and he always called him that atheist Jefferson.
Well, Jefferson cut up the Bible and made his own. So there you go.
Right. And and whatnot. So that's right. The idea, you either were or you pretended to be, and you knew enough about it that it got into your works. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So that's part of your education. So it just kind of ties that all together for the kids too. And so in the beginning, I would kind of more point them to find a thing and sort of tell me why the thing is important.
Yeah.
And whatever thing I have, like I'm in love with parallel structure. I can't help myself. It's just sort of it's one of my loves.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's beautiful. I think it's artistic. And the way that Patrick Henry like links these things together, the verbs that he uses, the pronouns, like, yeah, okay, great. That's my nerddom right there.
That's your jam. I get it.
So, but as we move away from the beginning of the year, we kind of tell them, okay, I want you to, like you and I were talking about this earlier, like find me some parallel structure. And now you kind of more craft what you want to do with it, as opposed to I'm telling you where to look, or I'm like, look in the intro, or look into this, or look in the wherever. The kids now have more freedom to, what do I know? What kind of works for me? How can I build off a question like my teacher has already asked me, so I can create my own kind of question? Because we're not going to be there to scaffold these questions for them on the test, but they might be like, oh, like Hampton asks me, she asks me a question like this, so I can use that.
Perfectly, right? And I was looking down here, just you even providing the boxes here, like it tells kids, hey, go find examples of this and provide some commentary, at the beginning of the year. And then, now it could be, hey, find an example of this and create your own question that's very much modeled after the ones that are made up here. And that kind of gets the kids used to kind of like making these kind of correlative questions as well, which I think then leads into where you would normally go after this. So, basically, and I'll let you talk about that in just a minute, but basically the idea here is that if you're reviewing for rhetorical analysis, create a scaffolded sheet for your kids. If you don't want to do death by essay, create a scaffolded sheet that gets the kids to get all of these rhetorical elements and choices and pieces here in order that they could then turn into an essay if they wanted to, but not require them to. But then what happens next? So they do this one that you created and you show them, and you might even want to explain out like, oh, hey, here's why I have this language in here. This is what it's doing to help you read better. What's the next step? So they do this for the Patrick Henry speech, and then all of a sudden, we're not done there. What happens next?
So we would, of course, especially early in the year, we'd go through, I would think maybe a little tedious, it might be a little tedious, it might be a little methodical, whatever word makes you happy. And so we would go through, we discuss it as a whole group if this were like normal life. We discuss it as a whole group. I might even have my PowerPoint up and be like, this is the real answer. They might take notes to kind of, again, help to bolster whatever information that they either brought to. So now they're walking away with a lot more than what they had.
Yep.
We actually do write a rhetorical précis on this at some point. Yep. And so this could turn into an essay if you wanted it to be an essay. You might do 2 or 3 of these as part of your unit, and then pick which one you feel the most comfortable with or whatever, and then go for an essay on that.
Yeah.
And for us, what I did recently, that we're in the satire unit, that was kind of, we're trying to get something a little bit fun. I don't know if
right. No,
a modest proposal is super fun. So we I had them look at Mark Twain's Advice to Youth, which I do think is kind of funny. Yep. And I had them I created a more open-ended type of a worksheet. We went through it, we talked, and then I gave them the war prayer, which I also love. And I made them, they could work with partners or what have you, and they created the worksheet. And then we went into, we haven't done rhetorical analysis full essay timed right recently. Yeah. So I had them do the timed right on that. So one of my kids actually was like in the chat. He's like, I knew this was coming.
Right. But I think that's a really great idea though, where it's like, okay, I'm going to create this for you, but now I want you to take our next piece and then you create the questions first that you could hand to somebody else. And I think as a teacher, scoring questions like this is much easier than scoring an essay. And, I could tell if this is an authentic question here, because every time you write these questions that deal with, these rhetorical elements, you consistently give that little bit of exigence here, hey, in an argument, these words do these types of things, boom, let's move to your questions. And this is a great model. And you just say, hey, look, you read your piece now and you create those questions, and you'll be able to tell if the kids got practice with yours, and then you now have their question sheets that are being made, and it's like, hey, pass it to a friend. Can your friend do it? Can your friend understand those questions? And then what's also cool too is like you get to see what the kids pick up rhetorically in the piece, because you're not telling them like that. At least down here, you were telling them, go find another reference to something religious, go find another piece of parallel structure, go find another piece of repetition or something. And then when they do it on their own, besides the first question, which is about purpose, it's kind of like, what can you actually see? So this is just a great opportunity, I think, to, like I said, not do death by essay, but still get the kids thinking and practicing rhetorically. So before we sign off here today and I do my last little outro, is there anything else you want to add to this conversation? I really appreciate that you came in and shared your knowledge with us here, because I think the assignment and the progress of this is great. But is there anything else you want to add here?
I mean, not really. Like, I know that a lot of people, it really depends on, again, what platform we're in, what's happening. Are we digital? Are we on paper? So everybody's kind of, I don't want to say spazzed, but a little spazzed because of the whole situation.
Right.
But if anything, if this is helpful, I know it, just our conversation and hearing that, hey, like, Hampton, you haven't been screwing up for the past couple of years because you haven't made this devices to choices switch as well as you should have. I know I was very... As I saw,
I never said that.
But I feel that after listening to what you've said, that it's reassured me that I haven't like totally messed up, and so that I just want people to feel confident that they're still, it's fine, everything's good, right. We're all good.
Right. We will still have plenty of success on exam day, and there's no doubt about it. And you know what? Also, just as we say to our students, their actual success in life is not measured by one test. And the same is for us as teachers. So I greatly appreciate this. We're going to have this document, once again, linked right down in the description. Shannon, I will put your name on it in just a minute, though, just so that everybody knows it comes from you. But with that being said, if this video is helpful to all y'all, right, the easiest thing you can do to support the Garden of English is to just click like and subscribe. That's the only thing that we actually ask you to do, I guess, consistently. On top of that, right, though, down in our description, though, we do have some affiliate links. And the reason why I pulled up this new document is just so I can have this white space here and pop up those pictures of those affiliate links. And so that's another way to help the Garden of English. We do sell t-shirts and other merch and posters and stickers and stuff. So you want to check that out at our website. Also linked down below. And the Garden of English is active on YouTube. Of course, we're active on YouTube. You're watching our videos on Facebook and on Instagram as well. Give us a like and a follow there. And ask us your questions there, and we can even make videos for such things. But Shannon, once again, absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it, and you know, hopefully we'll be able to get you on again soon. And another really awesome assignment that you have.
Thank you so much for having me. Like literally, when I told you this earlier, but for everyone else, I told my 15-year-old, I was like, I have a meeting today on the Zoom, and he's like, is it with the famous English guy?
That's so ridiculous. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that again, and I hope that you have a great one.
All right, thank you. You too.